Today, let's discuss 3 big mistakes that you must avoid with pocket aces if you want to have any chance of winning at poker. Pocket aces is actually my favorite hand in the game. Why? Because it's the best hand. It is the most profitable hand by a mile. But despite this, I sometimes get questions in the comment section on YouTube saying something along the lines of, my pocket aces always get cracked. Now, obviously, they don't always get cracked, but you may find that you play in a manner that results in your aces getting outdrawn a decent amount of the time. Or as other people say, that I never win a big pot with my aces. That's also a big mistake. And you have to realize that if you are experiencing these things, you're probably making errors. And if you make errors, you're not going to win as much money as possible from poker. But if you can fix these both costly and common mistakes, you're going to lose less when you happen to get beat, because look, you are going to get outdrawn sometimes, and you want to make sure you're minimizing your losses. And when you have the best hand, you're going to win more. So let's discuss mistake number 1. That is trying to play in a tricky manner before the flop. Simply put, stop trying to trick people. Just play good, strong, fundamentally sound strategies, which usually involve putting in a lot of money with your hands that are almost always good, that are also vulnerable to being outdrawn. And it turns out pocket aces is not going to win 100% of the time, right? So because of that, you usually want to be raising and re-raising with it. So enter the pot with a raise. Do not limp. The idea of I'm going to limp and try to limp re-raise someone is not a great strategy, because if you call the big blind and then 4 other people call the big blind and see the flop, you just let all of your opponents see the flop for basically nothing. And now if they make the best hand, you're going to have a difficult time getting away from it, right? So that's not ideal. You want to make your opponents put money in the pot poorly, and raising accomplishes that. But you may say, if I limp, someone's going to raise me every time. Well, first off, you don't know that. And even if someone does raise you, and then you re-raise them, unless you're doing this on a regular basis with a bunch of junky hands, your opponents are going to know you have a really good hand, right? So if they know you have a really good hand, that's not ideal either, because now they can play perfectly against you. And I'm sure you may find some incredibly obtuse opponents who will just pile all their money in with ace jack offsuit or king jack suited or pocket sevens. But I'm presuming we're playing in games where our opponents are trying to win and not just give all their money away, okay? So unless your opponents are oblivious, you do not want to limp with your pocket aces. So you want to raise whenever everyone folds to you, or if people limp before you and it folds around to you. If someone raises in front of you, you want to 3-bet, re-raise your aces. Yeah, you're typically going to make it about 2.5 times to 3.5 times your opponent's initial raise when you're in position, and between 3 and 4.5 times when you are out of position, using the smaller sizes when you are shorter stacked and the bigger sizes as you get deeper and deeper. And so, for example, say you're playing 1-2 no limit. If someone raises to $7 and you're in position, you're going to want to make it about 3 times that amount. So make it about $21. If you're out of position, maybe make it more like $28. Okay? When you're facing a raise and multiple callers, you're going to want to 3-bet again. Do not call and hope somebody behind you re-raises. But as more people see or call the initial raise, you're going to want to raise to a larger size. Because imagine you make it $21 after a $7 raise and 4 callers. Well, now they all have to put in $14 more to see a, $100 pot, right? So they're not going to fold anything. And to be fair, they're getting really good pot odds, so they should not really fold anything. So you're going to usually want to raise a little bit larger. And a nice formula to help you know how much to re-raise to when facing a raise and multiple callers is something like 3 times the initial raise plus any additional money that is in the pot. So say someone raises to $7 and 2 people call, and now it's on you. You're going to want to raise to 3 times $7, which is 21, plus $14 for the 2 callers, plus maybe a little bit more for the blinds and the ante if you're playing a tournament or whatever. So in that scenario, you do 21 plus 14, which is $35 plus maybe a little bit more. So something like $35, $36, $37 in that scenario would be a good re-raise size. That's going to result in your opponents not getting great pot odds, and it builds the pot very nicely when someone does call. All of that said, while you should be very aggressive with your aces before the flop for the most part, there are a few, and I mean very few, times where you should slow play with pocket aces. And you're going to find that the best time to trap with pocket aces is when the stack to pot ratio will be low when you call, especially when you can play post-flop from in position. The stack to pot ratio refers to how big the pot is compared to the stack remaining. And as you have less and less money in your stack compared to the pot, you don't mind slow playing as much because your opponent's drawing relatively thin and they do not get paid all that much when they happen to outdraw you, right? Like imagine you have $100 and there's $10 in the pot before the flop. When your opponent does outdraw you, they can win 90 more from you. But imagine there's $10 in the pot and there's only $5 left to bet. Now they can only win 5, right? So then you don't mind slow playing quite as much. So let's take a look at two pretty common spots to slow play aces. 20 big blinds deep when you are on the button versus a low jack raise first in. This means the low jack player, which is under the gun if you're playing six-handed, when they raise and you're on the button 20 big blinds deep, the game theory optimal strategy is to go all in with the hands in red and call the hands in green. Some people may be surprised to see that you should call raises on the button with a range this wide with all these hands in green, but realize this range also contains aces and kings. These hands never re-raise small. They never shove all in. They call every time because the stack to pot ratio is going to be very low. And calling these hands allows you to call a little bit wider. Some people will pull up a shove or fold chart in this scenario whenever someone raises in front of them and they're playing 20 big blinds deep. But if you do that, notice all these hands that you will end up playing poorly because if you only go all in, the whole range would be red, and that results in you not being able to jam or not being able to call nearly as many hands, which makes you less profitable. Remember, we're playing no limit hold'em, which gives you lots of options. So when you're shallow stack facing a raise, especially on the button, you're going to find that you should call with aces a lot. We have an app, the Poker Coaching app. You can download that in the iTunes or Android App Store. And we have these game theory optimal charts available for our members. Check it out at pokercoaching.com. Also, here's another situation where you should slow play, where in this scenario, you raise the button 40 big blinds deep and the big blind 3 bets. So 40 big blinds deep, everyone folds to you on the button. You raise, big blind re-raises you. This is another scenario where if you call, the pot's already going to be quite big. So you make it, let's say 2 big blinds, they make it 8 big blinds, and you call. Pot's going to be 17 or 18 big blinds in this scenario, and you will have about 30 left, 32 left. So you have roughly a 2-to-1 stack to pot ratio, which is very shallow. That said, notice again, all these hands in green do a lot of calling because you're in position. And notice we're also, again, slow playing aces and kings every time because these hands are basically always going to be strong enough to get it all in on the flop. But notice, in both these scenarios, you're playing very shallow stacked. So either the pot has already grown gigantic pre-flop because there's a raise and a re-raise, or you were just shallow stacked to begin with, okay? For the most part, though, don't get tricky before the flop. Do not slow play aces. Just play good, strong, fundamentally sound strategies, which, does sometimes involve slow playing the aces, but relatively infrequently. Mistake number 2 is overplaying marginal made hands. This is the biggest mistake I see from small stakes players across the board. And while aces are normally very strong and very premium, common situations when it becomes a marginal made hand are when you're deep stacked on a very connected board, when you're multi-way, and when a lot of money goes into the pot and you have only one pair. So let's take a look at a few examples I have pulled up for you. Here we have the aces. We raise it up to $8, playing 1-2 no limit from the low jack seat. Folds around to the big blind who calls. Flop comes 6-5-4. Big blind checks. What should we do in this spot? I want you to take a second and think about this very common scenario. I want you to pause the video and write in the comment section below if you would check it back, if you would bet $4, if you would bet $8, or if you would bet $16. Pause the video and write what you would do in the comment section below. All right, this is a very common spot that you want to make sure you master. I hope you did the quiz though. It's important to make sure that you are actively learning. While I realize a lot of YouTube videos, you just can kick back and relax, I want to make sure you're improving your skills. And if you enjoy this type of interactive learning, make sure you check out my training site, pokercoaching.com, where we have over 1,500 interactive quizzes like this, where we ask you not just how to play the flop, but also how to play pre-flop, the flop, the turn, and the river in common situations that you will encounter on a regular basis so that you know how to play these spots well. So make sure you take advantage of all of that at pokercoaching.com. This is a situation where the default play is to check. Why is the default play to check, you may ask? It's because this is a scenario where when you raise from the low jack seat, you don't really have all that many great hands. While you do have a few sets and a few straights, for the most part, you're going to have overpairs and unpaired high cards. And against that range, if your opponent check raises the flop, they essentially take all of your overpairs and make them bluff catchers. Because notice the player in the big blind can have lots of straights and sets and two pairs. So this is a very, very common spot just to let it go check, check. And then if your opponent bets the turn and the river, you call because you've either induced bluffs or overvalues from weaker made hands. And if they check the turn and the turn's a relatively safe turn, then you can feel pretty confident in putting in a value bet. So that's the standard play here. But what a lot of people do wrong is they pot it. They think, I want to bet big because I don't want to get outdrawn. And what happens is when they're beat, they don't fold. And they just end up playing a gigantic pot. So imagine we pot it here for 16 or 17, and the opponent raises to 50. Well, now we're just in a miserable spot because they could be check raising if they're good with any 7 for a straight draw, maybe even any 3, but also with all the nuts. And that puts you in a really, really bad spot that you would rather avoid. Now, if you are playing against the weakest, tightest, most straightforward opponents, then value betting is probably fine. But as you start playing against tougher opponents, and I hate to break it to you, the games are getting tougher all the time, you want to make sure you're playing much more strong, balanced, fundamentally sound strategies. Check, check, turns a king. Opponent bets $15. This is a spot where they really shouldn't bet all that often because a lot of our flop checkbacks are going to have a king. So when they bet, alarm bells should kind of be going off. But we're not going to fold our aces. Again, we wanted to play in a manner that would induce them to bluff and or overvalue worse hands. Like if your opponent has a hand like a king here, king, queen, they're probably going to value bet it, right? King, queen, king, jack, king, 10, whatever. And they may bet with any 8, 7, 3, or even a 2 as a bluff. So we have a call. You may say, why not raise here to make sure we don't get outdrawn? Because we could easily be crushed. And whenever a lot of money goes in the pot, we lose most of the time. But not all the time if your opponent is a good, strong, battling player. River's a queen. Opponent bets $30. This is, again, just an easy call. You may think, should we raise? Because when they bet smaller on the river, they probably don't have the nuts. I don't know. This is a big enough bet to where I'm just going to call. I would not be shocked to see random 2 pairs here. Random straights, right? I do think we're going to win in this scenario most of the time, though. Not this time when he shows up with 6-5. But notice, this would have been way worse if we just bet the flop and got raised, right? Because then we can't really fold on a blank, effective blank king turn, and we definitely can't fold on an effective blank queen river. So even though we lost this hand, notice we lost $50, whereas a lot of people in this scenario lose $200. It's way better to lose 50 than 200. And you got to realize, whenever you're playing poker, a penny saved is a penny earned, and you want to make sure you are minimizing your losses when you happen to be in one of those setup spots. Here I have aces again, playing 2-5. We raise it up to 3 big blinds. A bunch of people call. Jack, jack, 9. It's another spot where a lot of people just put out a bet. They may make a big bet, like $75, because they don't want to get outdrawn by the straight draws and the flush draws. But in reality, if you bet 75 here, yeah, you don't give the straight and flush draws great odds, but you also make all of the worst made hands fold, or most of the worst made hands fold. So unless your opponents are just extreme calling stations, when they continue here, you're going to be in terrible shape. You're going to be against the jack. And think about the calling ranges these players are going to have before the flop. It's going to be a whole lot of jacks, right? So just check and see what happens. If you check and one player bets and they fold to you, just check call. But if a decent amount of action takes place here, you should probably just fold immediately. Like say it goes bet raise or bet call, call, call. You should probably fold. Ugh, weird one. So here we have a small bet. We're obviously not folding to a small bet, but then it goes call and call. Look, if you wanted to take a card off here and see the turn, I don't hate it, but at the same time, you have to realize this is not going to go well for you at all unless you peel an ace, which is not going to happen very often. A lot of players will bet small in this spot with a jack just because they really want to get action, even though it's not necessarily... I mean, I guess it's a fine play, really, because they're in pretty good shape, especially if they have a hand like queen jack or jack 10 that blocks some of the random straights and like random flush draws the opponents could have. But I think in this scenario, folding's fine. It may seem nitty, and to be fair, if you're playing a small stakes game against like really bad, loose, splashy players, calling's probably fine. But this is a scenario where a lot of people screw up and they put in a raise. They think, all right, I have the best hand because they only bet small. But realize you don't know how your opponent's playing. A lot of people like to think they're mind readers, but I'm pretty good at this game, and I definitely don't think I know exactly what my opponents are doing in all scenarios. So I think this is either a call or a fold. With the ace of spades, I guess I don't hate calling, but you told me you wanted to fold. I think fold's fine too. And this time we just get out of the way. Move on. I think that might be a little bit tight, but fine. If we're facing a bigger bet there, then folding's definitely good. All right, raise it up, playing 1-3 to $10. Big blind calls. King 10-2, he checks. We'll definitely value bet. King 10-2 is a board you typically want to be betting pretty big on. This is a situation where your opponent has very good range connectivity, meaning when they have something decent, it's usually a top pair, middle pair, straight draw, flush draw, and those hands are not going to fold to any bet. This is a concept that comes from my cash game masterclass at pokercoaching.com. And while there are a lot of spots where you should continuation bet small, when you're playing deep stacked, these king high boards are very common spots for the initial raiser to bet big. If you do not know that, well, you probably haven't studied a ton. Make sure you check it out at pokercoaching.com. All right, we bet big, opponent calls, turns an 8, opponent checks. We'll definitely bet again. This is another very common spot to bet big when the turn is a blank or an effective blank, but it brings a few various backdoor draws. This is a very common spot to bet big with your hands that are almost always good, but very vulnerable to being outdrawn. And hands like aces and ace king definitely fall into that category here. We get called. River's the 9, and opponent donk leads all in. It's annoying. I would say in general, unless your opponent is known to be a very battling opponent, this is just a fold. While some players will mostly or only lead on this river with busted draws, I think most players in the spot are going to show you a straight literally every time. So fold. Do not pay them off. A lot of people think, oh man, I have aces. I guess I have to call. No, you don't. So anyway, don't overplay your marginal made hands. Mistake number 3. Kind of the opposite of overplaying your marginal made hands. It is that many players do not go for thin enough value. Most players in small stakes games are just too worried about being bluffed. They think, oh, if I bet and I get raised, I have to fold. But realize that just doesn't happen all that often. You want to go for thin value when you likely have the best hand, and if you are raised, you should fold. Let's look at a few examples of this. Here we have our aces again. Somebody raises, we will definitely re-raise because we are deep stacked here. About 3 times their bet, right? As we do. They call. King Jack 10. Interesting spot. I think we're supposed to bet this frequently and small because we have a whole lot of nut hands in this scenario. We do go 25. Opponent calls. Turns to 6. They check. And this is probably a check back at this point. Now, yeah, this is a scenario where you have to ask, are you trying to play GTO or maximally exploitative? Because a lot of players in this spot will always check raise better hands on the flop. If that's the case, we just always have the nuts. But good players will check call a lot on the flop with hands like ace queen. And if that's the case, we have to be a little bit more cautious. So check on the turn. This is a GTO principle. Again, check out the Cash Game Masterclass to see what GTO strategies look like in spots like this. River's a 2 of spades, an opponent checks. This is a spot where you will find that most small stakes players just check it back. They think, well, flush came in. They probably won't call me with a jack, which, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But realize they could easily be sitting with a hand like ace king or king queen or king 9 suited, right? And they will call a small or medium bet. So I definitely think something like half pot in this scenario is a good, strong bet. And if they raise you, you fold. You may say, why not bet smaller, like $30? Again, from a GTO point of view, you're going to find that you should very rarely make a tiny bet on the river in position. Usually you're going something like half pot or very big. We do bet 80. We do get called. They do have the ace-king suited. Kind of surprised they did not 4-bet us before the flop, but they didn't. But notice, though, the real takeaway here is that a lot of people just let it go check on the river because they're worried about the flush without thinking that hands like king 9 in this scenario can call a river bet. So make sure you are getting full value. Here, raise it up with the aces again. Get called by the big blind. Jack 7-6. They check. We'll definitely continuation bet. They call, turns another jack, they check. Ugh, this is a terrible river. Our terrible turn. I think this is a check behind now pretty clearly. If we bet and get raised, it's awful. The opponent will have a lot of jacks and flushes here. So I think we just have to let it go check, check. Check, check, fine. River's a 5, they check again. Straights come in. Should we go for value? I think the answer is definitely yes. I mean, this is a spot that you may feel like we can't get called by many worse hands, but think about it. If they have pocket 10s or king 7, a lot of people will find a call for a medium bet size in this scenario. So we do go for value. I like it. And like I said, if we get raised, we fold. This time they want to go all in. So we just fold, right? This is another spot where a lot of people now overvalue their marginal made hand and think, well, I have the aces. Guess I got a call. No, you don't. Just fold. It is okay to get out of the way when you are in bad shape. But these two hands are pretty good examples of spots where I realize a lot of draws came in, but there is definitely still value to be had. And a lot of players just let it go check, check. And that leaves money on the table with your aces, but it also makes you way easier to play against. And, at least from a GTO point of view, forces you to not have quite as many bluffs, which takes away value from your overall strategy. So, that's it. Those are the 3 big mistakes you must avoid with pocket aces. Again, to recap. Number 1, trying to be too tricky pre-flop. Number 2, overplaying your marginal made hands. And number 3, not going for thin value. If you can avoid these 3 mistakes, aces will definitely be the most profitable hand for you. That's going to be it for today. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a quick favor. Click the like and subscribe buttons below. Also, we have a lot of other fun educational videos here on youtube.com/pokercoaching. Good luck in your games. Have a great, great week. Have a great, great day. Do something nice for someone. And I'll talk to you next time.